Hello, everyone. My name is Ephraim Bosick, and this is my presentation on alternatives to mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex. So first, some background. In 2020, a global pandemic has emerged. However, in America, we have long been exposed to another pandemic, that is systematic racism. A new focus on this issue has directly resulted from the death of the late George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, as well as many other invaluable Black lives that have been lost. There are many institutions that have shaped our current circumstances, such as slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow. However, I will be focusing on the more modern institutions, such as mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, as well as their historical predecessors. So the guiding research questions, these are: what are the dangerous and adverse impacts of mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex on the Black community, as well as what alternatives are available and in what ways can they become practically and readily implemented. So mass incarceration, this has been widely practiced in American society throughout the early 1970s as well as the 1990s. However, it did not reach its peak until about 2009. And you can see right on this graph where it begins to level off. Political rhetoric such as law and order was largely popularized by Richard Nixon in his successful 1968 presidential campaign and was also used by many other prominent politicians of the time. This was in direct response to the civil rights era and many of the accomplishments by activists such as the late John Lewis, who was getting in good trouble, as well as Martin Luther King Jr., who was largely infamous at the time of his death. The approach that was taken on social justice issues, specifically of Blacks, was largely punitive and really dismissive to the real socioeconomic issues of the time. Admittedly, by an advisor of the Nixon administration, their approach was to create a system specifically targeting Blacks without making it appear that way. These systems proved highly effective and were reminiscent of previous legislation, such as vagrancy laws and Black codes. These were popular in the South for quite some time, and they made it, quote unquote, a crime um, for things such as loitering and not having a job when over the age of 18. Quite literally, in their eyes, Blacks were the problem. Nixon was also very good at using racially coded language, which played into white discontent towards the Black civil rights advancements and progress. Nixon's method also was extended to President Ronald Reagan by furthering the war on drugs, which was started by Nixon. Reagan was able to sensationalize and very much synthesize a crack epidemic, which would become extremely punitive to the Black community and enlarge racial disparity to white counterparts with possession of powder cocaine. Reagan placed a hyper focus on street crime in Black community, mobilizing millions of dollars along with the DEA and FBI agents while defunding from the issue of white collar crime. Reagan also claimed to use colorblind rhetoric while employing traditional conservative tactics of catering towards racial tensions and resentment towards Black progress. So continuing, mass incarceration ultimately reached heights unforeseen before with the administration of President Bill Clinton. He used get tough rhetoric, and Clinton promised to be tougher on crime than any other president before him. He would then fulfill this claim by creating policies which resulted in the largest increase in history of federal and state prison inmates. Some of the legislation Clinton made way for was the Three Strikes You're Out law, which caused individuals to lose public housing, job opportunities, and health benefits if convicted of minor felonies such as drug possession. He also created the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which limited welfare benefits to only 5 years. And again, there was a removal of benefits if charged of any felonies such as minor drug possession. He then also became even tougher with the one strike and you're out rule. Today, currently, the American criminal justice system holds almost 2.3 million people, which is the most in the world. And if you look right over here, you can see a breakdown into the demographic of the different type of crimes that cause incarceration, as well as rather local jails versus state prisons and federal prisons. So the prison industrial complex. The term prison industrial complex refers to the privatization of prisons as well as the usage of inmates for very cheap prison labor. The history of mass incarceration is directly related to the prison industrial complex and actually feeds into it because the prison industrial complex is not profitable if there are not a certain amount of inmates who are basically supporting it. So companies have long been invested in next to free labor, and it dates back to the enactment of the 13th Amendment, which still allowed Blacks to be subjected to involuntary servitude. It says that it can be used right here, except as punishment for a crime, which basically correlates to a form of almost modern slavery. Also, state prisoner wages range from 12 cents to 32 cents with extremely deregulated health and safety standards. Sometimes prisons may have mold or dangerous toxins and metals that are exposed to the prisoners. So, continuing, Core Civic is one of the largest private prison and detention centers owners, actually, and they were formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, and they list contract requirements to government owned prisons. So, right here, we actually have a letter which encompasses some of their requirements. We have a minimum occupancy of 1,000 beds for the facility, as well as an age structure no more than 25 years. However, what really begins to concern me is where they actually request that the prison maintains a minimum of 90% occupancy. And this actually isn't something that you could rightfully achieve without employing the tactics of mass incarceration. So Core Civic also makes up roughly 25% of ICE immigrant detainees, while more of three-fourths of all detainees are held in private detention centers. And you can kind of see an example of that right here in this graph. This is Core Civic with around 25% of all the immigrant detention centers, as well as the GEO group right here. Recent immigration policies from President Trump have supported record high numbers. Within May 2019, there was about 54,344 immigrants reported. However, Congress only provided the funds for an average of 45,000 people to be detained in these camps. So, what are the alternatives? During the New Deal era, there was a new consciousness towards some of the difficulties and injustices that prisoners were facing largely due to prison labor. The prison labor codes were created to help safeguard inmates, for example, giving work hour maxes, as well as allowing no lower than fair current price. This basically helped to protect free industry and prevent them from being undercutted, as well as prohibiting dangerous conditions for the inmates. The Hawes-Cooper Act was another example of just better legislation all around, which basically subjected the goods to the laws of the states. So if states were doing trading back and forth, a lot of the times it would discourage the use of prison labor because it may not be legal in certain states. And this is just a good example. The New York State bail reform was also recently passed by Governor Cuomo as a part of his recent budget. This eliminates cash bail for many various low level crimes because oftentimes people are stuck in local jails and they just simply can't leave because they aren't allowed to, or they aren't able to rather, um, post bail. Amongst COVID-19, there have also been many various alternatives which have been shaped, such as reducing admissions all around for inmates because of the overcrowded prison system, getting rid of bench warrants, which basically would incarcerate someone if they missed a hearing per se, parole breaches, again, where individuals are arrested for things that normally would not be considered a crime if they weren't in those circumstances, as well as shortening the sentences in state prisons and releasing nonviolent offenders completely. I think a lot of the different tactics that are being used under the circumstances really help to prove that there is a lot of room within the criminal justice system to really rethink and reshape the way uh, these systems and ideas are being employed. More recently, there has been ideas of redefining public safety and defunding the police. I know to many people, these ideas can seem very extreme. However, redefining public safety is something that largely benefits police departments because it largely reduces the responsibilities of an officer, and 9 times out of 10, officers are responding to what are considered nonviolent crimes. So by having other areas and allowing for more innovation, you can really increase the productivity of these officers and cause them not to have to respond to things that doesn't need their immediate attention. There are also many new alternatives that I will be exploring through my interview as well. All right. And so the research methods, again, interviewing, the purpose of this research is to evaluate the current as well as new alternatives available. I'll be doing this with my interviewees and conducting them with about between 4 to 8 individuals who basically represent a variety of different perspectives within local communities of Erie and Monroe County. These perspectives will help broaden the understanding and inform how change can readily be implemented in the local community. And the vast majority of these individuals are in positions that really do directly impact the community. So I'm curious to see what they have to say. Interview questions will focus on the general perspectives of mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex and inquire to whether there are any viable alternatives which can be explored more. So the conclusion, racial disparities continue to largely impact the Black community within the criminal justice system. You can actually see over here on this graph, but there's largely disparity between males to female. But what's really of concern is the disparity that's seen all the way dating back to 2006 between the Black and as well as the Hispanic community with that of the white community. Now, gradually, this begins to level off, but even in 2016, which is the latest recording of these statistics, you're seeing such a large disparity. And to me, this doesn't speak to the fact that a certain group or community of people is inherently more criminal or that their actions uh, prove as such, but it really speaks to the error and the work that still needs to be done within the criminal justice system. And with the rise of COVID-19, there are many more complexities that are uh, being made aware of. So this must be counteracted. Uh, for example, in the prison systems, prisoners often may have to pay a copay just to receive medical care. And this is something that's been removed in the midst of COVID 19, because as pointed out earlier, inmates are often only making like cents, like less than $1 or maybe up to $3 a day. So it can be very difficult for them to pay for these copays, as well as early releases for offenders who are close to the end of their time or are being arrested for nonviolent crimes. as well as having access to video calling, since in large part visits are being suspended during this time. And it's also important to prevent new racial disparities that are likely to take place just based on the fault within the system. And we have to continue to explore new and innovative ideas, which will be solutions to these very old problems. And these are my references here. And I just wanted to say thank you to the DDI and LSAMP program for providing me with the opportunity to engage and learn more through my summer research experience. And I would also like to personally thank my research mentors, Dr. Ann Howard and Tanya Griffin, for the continued support of my efforts and research goals. And also thank you all for listening.